Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this rally against the unchecked, out-of-control surveillance state we have here in New York. As part of Stop Surveillance Summer, we're going to be calling on city and state leaders to pass the laws we need to protect New Yorkers from the technologies that are invading every aspect of our lives, putting New Yorkers at risk every single day. And we're going to start off with none other than New York City Controller himself, Brad Lamb.
Thank you for cheering for Albert Foxconn. Technology Organizing Project. Thank you for organizing Stop Surveillance Summer. Great to be out here with my wonderful colleagues, Assembly members Roland Mondani and my council member, Jamana Hanif. And thanks to all of you from NICU, Women's Defenders, and everybody else who's out here this morning. Look, all New Yorkers want to be safe, and it is tempting to believe that somehow magical technology will keep us safe while respecting our civil liberties. And yet time and time and time again, when those new surveillance technologies are put out there, what we see is just the opposite. They creep into our civil liberties, they wind up discriminating against folks who were already discriminated against, and they don't make us safer. We've learned that over and over and over again. We've learned it with facial recognition technology, which has been shown to you to have so many more mistakes when surveilling women, people of color, Asian Americans, over and over and over again. We saw that with the gang database that grows to be a sprawling thing that has, thousands and thousands of young people in it and does not make us any safer. We saw that maybe most visibly when DigiDog was sent out into the world. And that finally said to people, this is not going to make us safe. It just leads to surveillance and intrusion in our lives. And of course, in that case, targeted to public housing, targeted on black and brown communities, these technologies, and obviously Zoran and Bahana was targeted on Muslim communities. These are technologies of discrimination. They are not technologies of safety. Now, for many years in New York City, they also were kept so secret that it wasn't even possible to know what the city was purchasing, what the NYPD was using, what contracts there were, what technologies there were. Thanks to the work of the Surveillance Technology Organizing Project, that finally is starting to change. I was proud to be a much too long time co-sponsor, but a co-sponsor of the Post Act. And thanks to the Post Act, New Yorkers can now see what technologies are being used. Advocates, the media can understand what technologies there are. That comes nowhere close to jeopardizing the safety of anyone in law enforcement. It simply tells New Yorkers what technologies our public safety officers are using and gives us an ability to debate, are those the right ones? Should they be used? What safeguards are necessary to protect people's liberties and to ensure that we're not discriminating? And then after the Post Act was passed, I'm pleased that a change was made in the Comptroller's office toward the end of my predecessor Scott Stringer's term. For many years, a program had been in place that shielded not just even police technology contracts, like an enormous number of policing contracts from public scrutiny, so that unlike all other contracts in New York City, that once they were registered, they simply were not made available to the public to know what was being purchased. So you can go on this amazing transparency website we have, Checkbook NYC, and see every check, well, almost every check the city writes, almost every contract the city registers, but for many years you could not see these special policing contracts. Toward the end of Comptroller Stringer's tenure, that program was ended, and those contracts are now coming on to Checkbook NYC as they are registered, and I'm committed to make sure that we do all we can in our office to continue that march of increasing transparency, because at a bare minimum, New Yorkers have the right to know what their government is buying, what their government is using, what those technologies are, so that we can have a robust public debate about what actually makes us safer, and so that we can make sure safeguards are in place, so that, as we have seen in the case of facial recognition, as we've seen in the case of geofence warrants, as we have seen far too often, technologies don't creep and become weapons against our communities, don't discriminate against Black and brown and Muslim folks, but instead that we are thoughtful about how we deploy our resources to invest in communities, since that is what we know will make them safe. Thank you again so much to Stop. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to my colleagues. Thanks to Albert. It's really good to be with you.
Thank you, Comptroller Lander, for your leadership on this issue, both in the council and now as Comptroller, pushing back on the veil of secrecy that has hidden billions of dollars worth of NYPD contracts. Secret contracts are not compatible with democracy, they're not compatible with good government, and we're grateful for your work to help show New Yorkers just how much money we have wasted on technology that doesn't work, but does discriminate. One of the things we'll be calling for today is for Mayor Adams to scrap his calls for new forms of unproven and biased technologies, like his plans for potentially including metal detectors in subways, something that never could work, will only put New Yorkers at risk, and will just turn our daily commute into a TSA checkpoint. Next, we're going to be hearing from a champion of surveillance reform and someone who has stood up vocally to the NYPD and its lies about surveillance history, and that is Council Member Shahana Hamid.
Thank you. Stop and every organization present today. I'm Councilmember Shahana Hamid from Brooklyn. As a Muslim, I know firsthand the unwarranted, the unjust surveillance practices of the NYPD. And earlier this year, as I began my term, I went head to head with the NYPD's counterterrorism chief, John Miller, asking two questions. Can the NYPD detail comprehensively the extent to which it carried out its Muslim surveillance program? And two, will the NYPD issue a public apology for the harms it did to the Muslim community? The response I got was abhorrent, disrespectful. Miller said that no Muslim surveillance program existed, that it was a perception. It is a perception of our community that this harm took place. And to say that publicly under oath is something that the NYPD has done over and over again. And so I'm grateful for Stop, because we are calling on the Manhattan District Attorney to investigate Miller's comments and for possible perjury under oath. And so I'm going to continue this fight to make sure that NYPD does not get away in the fight for the practices that they had in the past. As a child growing up in New York City post 9/11, going to CUNY Brooklyn College and seeing the extent to which informants were sent onto our campuses, and then I go home to know that people who look like us were then spying on us in our mosques and community organizations. It never stopped, and it has not stopped now. And so together with Stop and all the other organizations present on the project to end surveillance now and forever, I call on the city to ban facial recognition, to ensure that we do not go through a TSA checkpoint in our subways or anywhere else for that matter, and to make sure that we're not spending any more dollars on drone technology or any other technology to advance surveillance apparatuses in our city. And so to Albert and every other organizer who has stood up, and I'm talking about the times when No Separate Justice Coalition existed, as we would stand in front of MCC, the Metro correctional center as Muslims who are held in solitary confinement. That fight also is connected to this fight. And so I'm happy that we're here calling on loudly that this will be a summer that we end surveillance and we pass the legislation required to ban all facial recognition, because these practices will continue to harm our most vulnerable communities: Muslims, immigrants, working class, low income, black and brown communities, young people, queer and trans communities, and women. And so I'm here, I'm standing with you, and I'll continue to use my voice in the hearings. You know, I'm not a member of the Public Safety Committee, but as the only Muslim council member in this cohort, it is my responsibility to show up and to let it be known that this is the power of the Muslim community, that we have not forgotten, and we must ensure that this never happens again, not to us, not to anybody else in this city. Thank you so much, and I of course want to give a shout out to my colleagues in the Assembly Council, Assembly members Oran Mamdani. There are not a lot of Muslims out here, and so we take up a lot of space because we have to. And I'm proud that in that hearing where I questioned Commissioner Miller, I had good allies, my council colleagues who stood up. And so right now, we won't stop talking about this, and I'm here, and I'm excited to continue championing. Thank you.
Thank you, council member, and thank you for holding the NYPD accountable for its history. Next, we will be hearing from a champion in Albany, because yes, this is a fight in New York City, but it is also a fight statewide, and that is why we're so proud to have State Assembly member Zoran Mamdani here to speak about his work fighting back against police surveillance.
I really just want to build off of what Councilmember Hanif has said. You know, we both grew up in a post 9/11 New York City, and I have the privilege and the honor of representing Astoria in Queens. And when we think about the demographics unit that was launched in Michael Bloomberg's New York City and Michael Bloomberg's NYPD, it made Astoria one of the focuses for its surveillance apparatus. We had NYPD agents going to our mosques, to our hookah bars, to our barbershops, to our cafes, to our travel agencies, even going to Astoria Park to write down when Muslims would play soccer. This was the extent of the surveillance apparatus. I went to high school with someone who I later found out was pressured into becoming an informant by the NYPD as a means of averting an arrest for low-level drug misdemeanors. This is the experience that we had in this city. And now we come into these halls of power where we find continued justification for surveillance, when we know that these practices are simply pretexts for putting predominantly black and brown men into prison. That is what they are. And in Albany, we know that at the state level, we have state agencies and departments, policing departments across the state that use the tactic of fake accounts to entrap New Yorkers, that coerce New Yorkers who know no better, who are terrified of being in a police interaction, to hand over their credentials for their private accounts. And we have seen that the way that these practices are used ends up having young boys being put in jail for the crime of a Facebook like. Put in jail, put under suspicion because they are seen to be in the same network as other individuals, when we know that criminality itself is so based on a racist understanding of who is a criminal and what actually creates crime. So much of the time, the lack of safety in our communities is actually a result of state practices and state policies. And so I have introduced legislation with the help of the Stop Coalition and so many of the other advocates who are here to ban the use of fake accounts across New York State, to ban the practice of coercing New Yorkers to provide their login credentials for their social media accounts. Because we know that those practices are but methods of exploiting New Yorkers' well-intentioned desire, and a desire we all share for safety, and using it instead as a means by which to ensnare New Yorkers who have been left behind by the city and the state. So we are fighting in Albany, we are fighting here at City Hall, and we are fighting across New York State in the streets as well to ensure that our constituents, our colleagues, and our neighbors understand that the branding of these efforts is completely separate from the impact of them. And we must take a clear-eyed look as to what these efforts are actually doing to our people. Because it has been too many years and too many people that we have lost to the surveillance apparatus, and we need to start saying no. So thank you so much for being here. I'm proud to be in this fight with each and every person who is on these steps so that we can fight for a New York that lives up to the dream of safety and justice for each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember, both for those words and for being willing to introduce the first bill in the United States that would ban fake social media accounts by police. No one should be tricked into clicking away their constitutional rights, and it's exciting to see New York poised to become a national leader. Next, I want to hear from one of the true luminaries and lions in the fight against mass surveillance, a man who every day helps represent New Yorkers who are targeted by NYPD surveillance. Jerome Greco, the Legal Aid Society Digital Forensics Supervising Attorney. Jerome.
Thank you, Albert, for that wonderful introduction. And also thank you to Comptroller Lander and Councilmember Hanif and Councilmember Madani. I really appreciate you coming out and supporting this group and all the advocates that are here with me today. Law enforcement continues to push this narrative that surveillance or more surveillance is the solution to every problem. And surveillance companies make millions of dollars off of that narrative, saying that their products is the magic answer, the magic solution to fix all problems, to fix crime. And yet, every time this happens, our rights get chipped away at, little by little, little by little. And they still ask for more. And so if these are the magic solutions, why are we continuing to have more magic solutions? Why are we continuing to have to give up our rights? And that money, instead of being spent on better and more affordable housing, jobs and training, schools and mental health resources, continue to go to these mass surveillance companies and into the budgets of law enforcement. Take facial recognition, for example. Despite knowing facial recognition is biased, law enforcement still uses it. Despite its connections to mass surveillance, to false arrests, and to a whole host of other problems, we don't have any city legislation. We haven't passed state legislation on it. We need that now. We need the city to pass legislation on the use of facial recognition by law enforcement. We need the state to ban the use of facial recognition by law enforcement. Similarly, we have ShotSpotter. So we say ShotSpotter gives you this accuracy rating. What they don't tell you is that accuracy rating comes from self-reporting from their customers. So if a law enforcement agency doesn't report a false report or a false alert or a missed alert, they count it as accurate, which amplifies their accuracy incorrectly. At the same time, every single ShotSpotter alert sends police into that area, armed and ready for what they expect to be an armed person who has fired a shot. Anybody who happens to be in that area, particularly people of color, are targeted and are at risk. We also see now the increasing and growing use of geofence searches. Geofence searches can gather information on anybody who just happened to be in an area where a crime occurred, even if it may be hours later or maybe blocks away, and have their privacy invaded and potentially risk of being falsely accused. This needs to be banned. We can't wait for our courts to get to this years later. We need our legislatures to act now so that we can stop the harm as it's currently occurring. Social media mining, scraping, and monitoring is becoming a common practice by law enforcement. And with that is often the use of fake accounts. It's bad enough that we have law enforcement building dossiers on teenagers, particularly teenagers of color, based upon who they may friend, or the neighborhood they live in, or their racial or gender or sexual identity. We now have them using fake accounts in order to gain access to that, as if all the other resources they have weren't enough, and as if all this information is necessary in order for the safety they claim that is being brought by them. Facebook had an internal motto of move fast and break things. Despite all the damage that belief did, it's made much worse when law enforcement acts in the same manner. The public should know what's going on and should have a say in what's happening. We need our elected officials, including those here today who I'm happy have joined, to make bans happen. That's what needs to happen. We can't expect law enforcement to do it. They've shown over and over again that they're not willing or capable. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. And I want to underline one thing Jerome said. We need a facial recognition ban. We see council members who are eager to introduce it. We see New Yorkers who want to support it. And the only reason we do not have legislation introduced in the city council today is because of city council bureaucracy and Byzantine rules that stop that legislation from coming forward. We need Speaker Adams to work with her colleagues to make sure that this legislation becomes a reality. That at a minimum, New Yorkers get to debate whether we should have this racist technology putting our neighbors in harm's way. Next, we're going to hear from an amazing advocate who has fought firsthand against NYPD abuses for years and has always stood with the fight against mass surveillance, and that is Erica Johnson of the National Lawyers Guild Mass Defense Committee, the co-chair. Erica.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you, Councilmember Lander, everybody who showed up here today. This is awesome. I'm also the founder of the Comedy and Social Justice Organization. But we're here to talk about surveillance. Buffalo is my hometown. I grew up there. My family still lives there. I visit. I've traveled hundreds of miles just to go back to the same dentist. No one else is good enough. I can't help but think that, what if that weekend I visited, what if Miss Pearl or Celestine Cheney was me? I know Buffalo might seem unrelated, but we're talking about surveillance. How many times have the police had an opportunity to stop a mass shooting using surveillance? I wait. Not just the racist ones, but the children, the parents, the janitors. The shooter almost always posts his plan somewhere online. In Buffalo, he had a whole manifesto, and he even streamed his terror on Twitch. And yet, not one mass shooting was prevented using surveillance. Which begs the question, who are they surveilling? What chat rooms are you monitoring? Who are they following? It can't be the racists. It can't be the white supremacists. No, it's the Muslims. It's the immigrants. It's the black folks. The Martin Luther Kings who are killed for trying to bring change for their people. The Fred Hamptons that are murdered because they love their people. That's who we're surveilling. They're the threat. The police can't be trusted to watch us, to save us, because they've never done right by us. Honestly, I don't know why they want to watch us anyways. We can't barbecue, we can't bird watch, we can't drive, we can't run, we can't sleep, we can't breathe in peace. So I urge Speaker Adams to get out of the way and let the council members keep black and brown people safe. Stop promoting unproven and dangerous technologies.